One of the intense pleasures of travel, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, is the opportunity to live amongst those who have not forgotten the old ways, who still feel their past in the wind, touch it in stones polished by rain, taste it in the bitter leaves of plants. All of these cultures teach us that there are other ways of thinking, other ways of being, other ways of orienting yourself in social and ecological and spiritual space. And that's an idea that, if you think about it, can only fill you with hope. Now, together, the myriad of cultures of the world envelop the planet in a kind of a web of life that is as important to the well-being of all of us as indeed is the biological web of life that you know as a biosphere. And you could think of this cultural web of life as being an ethnosphere. And you could define the ethnosphere as being the sum total of all thoughts and dreams, ideas and myths, intuitions and inspirations brought into being by the human imagination since the dawn of consciousness. The ethnosphere is humanity's great legacy. It's a symbol of all that we've achieved and the promise of all that we can achieve as a wildly creative and imaginative species. And just as the biosphere is being severely impacted with the loss of habitat and the concomitant loss of plant and animal life, so too is the ethnosphere, but if anything at a far greater rate. I became very interested in this idea of sacred geography, and what I mean by that is, what does it mean for people to really believe the earth is alive, responsive, and that human beings can demand things from the earth but also have reciprocal obligations to the earth? I mean, I put it this way, I was raised in the forests of British Columbia to believe those forests existed to be cut. That was the foundation of the ideology of scientific forestry that I learned in school and I practiced as a logger in the woods. That made me very different than the First Nations, who believed that those same forests were the abode of Hukuk and the crooked beak of heaven and the cannibal spirits that had to be embraced at the north end of the world during the Hamatsa initiation, such that the wisdom of the wild would be brought back to the community in the potlatch. Now, the interesting thing is not whether they were right or we were right. The interesting thing is not whether that forest was just cellulose and board feet or was it the domain of the spirits. The interesting thing is how the belief system of the particular culture has real consequences. The First Nations lived with a relatively modest ecological footprint for generations on the coast of North America. My particular intellectual and social and economic lineage, in but 3 generations, tore those forests asunder. So I was raised in Canada, believed that a mountain was a pile of rock ready to be mined. How did that make me different, and how did that make my society's embrace of the natural world different than a kid like my godson in the Andes, raised to believe that the mountain is an Apu spirit that will direct his or her destiny? You know, as we think about these themes, the 20th century will be remembered not just for its technologies or its wars, but also as the era in which we lived through this collapse of cultural diversity, this collapse of our own human legacy. And I want to stress that the problem is not change. All cultures are always dancing with new possibilities for life. Change is the one constant in human affairs. Nor is the problem technology. I mean, Lakota did not stop being Sioux when they gave up the bow and arrow in favor of the rifle, any more than an American farmer stopped being an American when he gave up the horse and buggy in favor of the automobile. It's neither change nor technology that threatens culture, it's power. You know, we have this idea that these cultures, quaint and colorful though they may be, are somehow destined to fade away as if by natural law, as if they're failed attempts at being us, failed attempts at being modern. Nothing could be further from the truth. In every case, these are dynamic, living peoples being driven out of existence by identifiable forces. And that's actually an optimistic observation, because it suggests that human beings are the agents of cultural destruction. We also can be the facilitators of cultural survival. So in the end, we have to ask ourselves, really, what kind of world do we want to live in? You know, the great anthropologist Margaret Mead said before she died that her greatest fear was that as we drifted toward a kind of blandly amorphous generic world culture, not only would the entire range of the human imagination be reduced to a more narrow modality of thought, but we would wake one day as from a dream, having forgotten that there were other possibilities of life. These other peoples are not failed attempts at being us. They're unique answers to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? And when answering that question, they do so in 7,000 different voices. And those voices collectively become our human repertoire for dealing with the challenges that will confront us in the ensuing millennia. None of this is in the slightest way to denigrate our own wondrous culture. The point is not the traditional versus the modern, but the rights of free people to choose the components of their own lives, and how can we find a way that all peoples can benefit from the genius of modernity without that engagement having to imply the death of their ethnicity. And this is why this is not simply a matter of nostalgia or human rights. It's really a matter of geopolitical stability. In the end, I would just leave you with this thought that I think we need the dreams of these different cultures, because as much as I look forward to the visions of my own children, I think that the visions of all these kids become part of our collective heritage, and indeed together become part of our geography of hope. Thank you very much.